In today's episode, once again, we speak to Kyira Wackett. Kyira is a therapist, public speaker, community advocate. She holds a master's degree in counseling psychology and is a licensed therapist specializing in eating disorders, anxiety disorders, and trauma. She has been speaking on topics related to mental health and well-being for over 10 years and focuses on balancing insight and action to create a meaningful and sustainable change. And today, Kyira is talking to us about 5 steps to shame resilience. Let's speak to Kyira and find out. Welcome. This is Gullkhan, your money mindset expert. And once again, we have the amazing, we have the beautiful, we have the charming Kyira Wackett. Welcome, Kyira.
Hi, I'm so glad to be back again.
And thank you so much for coming back here. We had such a fantastic conversation on Friday feature that we had to have you back for Money Talkies. Kyira, everyone's heard your intro. They know how fabulous you are. But please, in your own words, tell everybody what it is that you do.
I know we talked about this a little bit in the Friday feature, but thinking about myself as a person kind of personally, professionally, all around, I describe myself as somebody focused on shame resilience. So as a therapist, as a mom, as a partner, as just a friend, anybody in the world, a person interacting with your delivery driver, I really see myself as being a person that's studying, learning, and trying to unravel the sort of tethering that we all feel with shame.
And that leads us on to today's topic, which is 5 steps to shame resilience. Now, we talked about shame quite a bit actually on Friday feature, how important integral role it plays in your life. And sometimes without even you knowing, it can impact the way you view the world, the way you view yourself, and the kind of life you believe you can lead as well. I think it just impacts so many different parts of you and influences your decision at such a profound integral level that you don't even realize until you've done some healing around it, that, oh my God, it impacted me so much that your life-changing decisions are based on influences, because of the shame. So how does someone even recognize that shame is playing a part in their life? And I asked this question as leading on from the conversation on Friday. I did not know until I did the healing recently that most of my decisions in my life impacting ones, were based around this idea of being a good girl and not bringing shame upon my family. And it's one of the biggest things that I still this day I have is a point that I've talked about my partner, my ex-husband, said about how my children would be embarrassed because of me, because I've been divorced twice. And it's a factor which goes in my brain, and I'm still worried about it. That if my daughter tomorrow picks a Pakistani or an Indian partner, if it's from South Asian subcontinent, they will view me as somehow of lesser value because I've been divorced twice. So my shame will impact my daughter and her happiness. Now, that's a profound thing. And I recognize that I have healing to do around it. My daughter doesn't give a damn. She goes, she's very proud of me because you did nothing wrong, Mom. And I know I did nothing wrong. But I shouldn't even have to justify myself to people I did nothing wrong. But right. I am, and to myself, and trying to work out, like, oh, I hope she doesn't. And I'm secretly hoping she doesn't pick up Pakistani or Indian guy, because I don't want to explain myself to his family. It's amazing how my whole life has revolved around shame.
Yeah. And that the more we do this, the more we realize that most of our lives, most of the people around us, their lives has all been resolved around shame, or revolved. I said resolved. But the idea that we, now we talked about this briefly before, but it's the idea that we are born with the sole purpose of securing our basic needs, and connection is one of our basic and primary needs. And so you come into a system that is, I think we've sort of confused collective with external approval. So there's collectivistic cultures. There's this notion of everybody being a part of something and playing a role and doing those things, but we've sort of lost sight of celebrating individuality, authenticity, promoting individuals to feel good about themselves and be a part of their community. And I think it's a thing, you know, when you study both sides, individualistic and collectivistic cultures, there's obviously beautiful elements to both. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost on either side is on every end, we're looking to feel like we belong in the world as we are, but we're figuring out who that is. And every time we get an entry point of data that says, oh, well, this person is better than this person does this, you have to do this for me to love you. You know, think about us as kids and the expectations on us as kids, whether it was our parents or caregivers, our teachers, whoever it might be. And as you got older, and so shame is really this constant surveyor in your brain. It's a subset of our fear that's looking for ways that you're going to screw up, because we're in a system that says nobody is good enough unless they meet XYZ expectations. And so we're all sort of chasing this feeling, but it's like a yardstick that keeps moving. As someone in recovery from an eating disorder, that's how eating disorders work, is you'll get to that point. If I can just get to this size or this weight or this thing, then I'll be fine. And then you get there and then you're negotiating to the next spot and the next spot. And so it's this notion of you start to chase an element of perfection. If you can reach this point, then you'll be fine. You can take a breath, you'll be deserving, you'll be wanted, you'll be a part of it. So then you chase, or you get to some X spot, and then you're just afraid you're going to lose it all. So both sides, you're just constantly playing into the fear of rejection, the fear of not being good enough. And all of it is rooted to feeling like we don't have both, I think, the right and permission, but also the capacity to choose for ourselves, to honor what we think and feel, but that instead we have to rely on the systems around us. And that's what I think really gets us stuck. Again, it could be these big ticket items we're talking about, like abusive relationships, eating disorders, but it could be complacency in daily life, being in a sort of a loveless, like we're good friends, we manage our kids well, but we don't really love each other. But it's fine. You know, I could deal with that. Or I don't really love my job. I feel unfulfilled in this way. I don't enjoy eating, you know, all these little things, but it's fine. And that, I think that's sometimes even a bigger threat than the larger ticket items, because it becomes even easier to talk ourselves into the sting, the complacency, the shame, because it's quote unquote not that bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you're saying this. When I look around, and I'm specifically talking about South Asian culture here, because those are most of the marriages I'm looking at. Vast majority of those marriages are compromised based on, okay, so we don't love each other, we don't, you know, we've grown apart, but you know, we're here together for the sake of children, and that's it. And it would be too much shame for us to divorce now. And it's that shame attached to separation that they don't go ahead. And they talk about the Western world, how, you know, divorce is so too common, people don't compromise, people don't work together, but the needs are not being met within that marriage.
Right.
Nobody cares about, you know, what's that all about? You know, life is a test, and life, you know, all these sort of comments are thrown about. And I wonder how many of those people are judging others and therefore, you know, create shame from themselves, that if I'm judging this X, Y, and Z, God forbid if I ever left my husband or my wife, then the shame around this would be horrendous. I will be judged in the same way. And that's why they don't, you know, budge from their own. And they're quite happy to have extramarital affairs. So affairs go on, but they're not going to leave the marriage. But that's just one scenario. That, I mean, shame plays a role in a whole different ways. Of another one is starting a business. There's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, and I know, you know, everyone listening to it has an idea or wants to create a business, but the shame of leaving their profession, you know, whatever profession they have, which they worked on for the past 10, 15, 20 years, and then trying a profession, a business which may not work. And the shame attached to that failure stops them from in their tracks, stops them from even trying, and keeps them in that, you know, maybe mind-numbing job which they despise for the last 5 years.
Right. Absolutely. And you start to, again, erode the capacity and the space for dreaming, for goal setting, for longing in any way, to create the safety net. You know, I think about if I have a circle around me and I just, you know, of grass, and I'm constantly trimming the grass and I'm watering it and I'm taking care of it, it's probably going to be an incredibly beautiful patch of grass. But I'm never leaving that space. I'm never doing anything more. I'm never allowing myself to, I'm sort of expecting myself to stay in a timestamp, be the same person and want the same things for the rest of your life. And also assuming that a misstep, a failure, a blip, whatever you'd want to call it, is then going to mark me for the rest of my life. You know, when I think about things like, I also ran an art business and I love to paint. I love to create. I had thought about, you know, I kind of dreamed to go to art school, and I got into art school. And then we talked about this briefly in our last episode about how I continued to sell myself on the doctor sort of pursuit. And so I talked myself out of these things a lot. And as I got older, I started an art business. I was painting, doing shows. I loved it. And COVID happened. And the world changed around a lot of things, but particularly around art. And I had my daughter 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And my life just looks different. My life would have looked different even if there wasn't a pandemic, by having a kid enter my life and how I would have structured my time. But I started to realize that I wanted art to be mine again, not something that I was doing for the sale, not something that I wasn't in love with an art business. I was still in love with art, but I resented it as a business. So giving myself permission to say, I'm going to close my art business, or giving myself permission to say, in my business now, I would say I just launched my new program that I spent the last year building. And I would say I spent a year building it. And that was big for me because I was very much what's the next thing to do to make the sale, to do it better, to advance your business, blah, blah, blah. I tried, memberships that were great in theory, but they weren't the right thing. I'd try, I'm going to offer this thing and this thing and these events and this thing. And you'd come to my website and you'd be like, I don't quite know exactly what you do because you do too many things and I don't know where to start. I'm overwhelmed by the idea of what this even looks like. So I'm doing to them the same thing their brain's already doing. But the idea of admitting that, of saying, gosh, I started this business and I didn't get it right away. Here's round 2, round 3. And honestly, building this program and getting clear on my business is round 8 of what I'm doing. And I finally feel like I found it for now. I'm sure that will evolve and change.
Of course.
But it's saying, what does it mean to close down another business? What does it mean? And my biggest thing when I let go of being a doctor, when I closed this business, I would constantly find myself rooting to this fear of, I don't want people to think I couldn't do it. I'm okay doing this. I'm okay not wanting to be a doctor. I'm okay picking a different field, but I want everybody to know that I could have been if I wanted to. And that was very different in terms of, again, still externally driven. And that is really what led me to down the therapy path, getting in the room with clients, thinking about change, thinking about my own change, to be like, wait a minute, what are we missing here when we're talking about how we deal with shame and how we get out of these patterns and systems? Because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of noise, but there's a lot of great stuff too. Coaches, programs, and yet we're still missing it. We're missing the mark. There's something we're not getting at. And I've come to find out it roots back to that shame. It roots back to these visceral, full body, fear-based reactions of what would happen if we broke out of the norm we've spent 20, 30, 40, 50 years living under.
Yeah, I totally agree with that and totally understand that. And I think before we start on the 5 steps, I just want to share something else. I mean, I'm a money person. I should talk about money mindset. The amount of shame that's attached to our money stories and how we grew up and how much money we did or we didn't have, unbelievable. And then, when we go through it, every aspect of our life has money shame attached to it. And letting go of that shame is one of the biggest hurdles, I would say. but biggest,
Mm-hmm.
milestones, if you overcome and you're able to overcome that shame, especially growing up as a child, and that could be money, having money and not having money. It works both ways, by the way.
Yeah, right.
It has the greatest impact on your financial well-being, and it's all rooted around shame, but specifically around money shame. And that's
Mm-hmm.
when we started this discussion about shame, and I realized shame can come and sort of bite your backside in so many different forms, in career,
Yeah.
in personal relationships, in your money stories, a lack of or too much money, or how good you weren't good, were you academically able or not academically able, did you have learning difficulties, you didn't have learning difficulties, and so forth. And I talk about something called, embrace thine ugly. One of the ugliest things about me growing up was I'm severely dyslexic, which is interesting because I'm a lawyer, and I didn't know I was even dyslexic until my first year of law degree. That's when I was assessed to be not just dyslexic, but severely dyslexic. And so I literally openly talk about being dyslexic and how, I can't tell the difference between left and right, and my numbers around, and I still can't spell, and I'm not embarrassed about it. And someone who criticizes me, I'm like, yeah, I'm dyslexic. But I had to work at owning it. So when you own something, you can no longer be ashamed about it. And this is why I'm trying. I haven't quite got there yet, because I realized I thought I had, until this element of my daughter growing up and, potentially, having boyfriends and partner, thinking that the thoughts sort of striking in my head that, oh my God, hopefully she won't. And when I caught myself saying, I hope she doesn't ever, fall for a Pakistani or Indian guy, I'm like, why not? Because I don't want to explain, which means that I still have to work around owning the shame around it. But just before we go on about it, as long as you can embrace the ugliness about you that you think is ugly, by the way, it's not necessarily ugly, just, I want to reiterate that point. It's not necessarily ugly, but you feel it's ugly about you. If you embrace that ugly, as soon as you embrace it, and as soon as you face it, you're no longer embarrassed about it. Shame loses all its power.
Whoops, there you go. The shame of also those little things, you go, oh shoot, I just messed up, and then you release it. So just the example of how quick it can come in. But I think one of the things that happens is shame only grows in the darkness of our brain, because the stories that we tell ourselves, the realities that we tell ourselves, and how quick we can get there. That is, I got a 1-star review. I sell therapeutic worksheets on Etsy, on my website too, but I was like, all right, we'll try it on Etsy. It's a, passive income source, and blah, blah, blah. And they're therapy worksheets. So it's not necessarily what people go to Etsy for, but they've done well. And then I got a 1-star review a little over a year ago now. And I kid you not, I sat here right in the same spot we're talking right now. I was maybe 10, 12 minutes after seeing it, I had figured out how to shut my business down, all the ramifications of canceling contracts for the next year. I had let because this one person saw behind the curtain everything I was trying to protect against. They gave me a 1-star review. Looking at it now, they might have actually thought it was 1-star quality. They might have also had a really crappy day, and they, just did something and whatever. And I read it, and like, there are things about it, didn't even matter what they said. It was the fact that I saw something that said, you have spent your whole life telling yourself you're 1-star. Now that it's out in the world, now it feels real. The same happens in reverse. Once you put the shame thought out in the world, it does the opposite. It becomes sort of unreal. We untether to it. So I got the 1-star review. My brain internally went to, you're a piece of garbage. Everybody saw it. Do you see it? Like, here's the proof. 10, 12 minutes in, I am knee deep in how to shut down my entire business because of one person I've never met on Etsy who didn't like something on something that was happening. And then you go, holy cow, I'm willing to give my entire self to somebody else. My entire business that I've worked for, I'm willing to let it go over one person's review. And then you say out loud, you go, why? Well, because this person represents everything I've told myself is the problem with me. This person represents the seeing, the knowing that I've tried to protect against my whole life. And now they know. I've thought it. I've thought about, why would somebody hire me? Why am I speaking at this event? Why am I the one with these clients? But now this person saw it. This person called me out, and more will follow. So then you start to say that out loud, and then it's okay, but what evidence do we have? And you start to walk through a process of challenging it. The more you start to do that part out loud, instead of just accepting the shame thought at its face value, that's when we start to see it leave us. Like saying out loud about your daughter and thinking these things. Okay, well, walk through that. Why is that a problem? Okay, well, and then you go deeper and you go, how is that rooted to your shame? How is that rooted to the systems? How is that rooted to the culture? Okay, great. What do we want to do about it? And I'm starting to kind of get into the 5 steps here, even that we're going to talk about, but it's the naming it first, the being willing to sit down and put it down on paper, put it out into the world. That is step 1 of even being able to make it so that shame is no longer the driver of your life.
And let's go into the 5 steps now. But when you were talking, the song, from the movie Frozen, Let It Go.
Yes.
Yes. I think that really represents everything to do with shame and who we are, being the good girl and trying to please everyone and doing everything right. And now that everyone knows, let it go. Yep. I think that song is, if there's a song for shame, about letting go shame, I think that song represents it, and it's really, really powerful. And it did really well when it first came out. But for that reason, because I think so many people can relate to it, because shame has so many different faces, and it can come to us in all different forms. That song sort of hit everyone's heart because it just represents what we've been feeling for the longest time. But let's get into the 5 steps. So step number 1 is recognizing and verbalizing what we feel and what exactly is shame. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically I think about kind of steps 1 and 2 are really kind of the amalgamation of what we were just talking about. So step 1 is really name your problem. What is what's going on? What are you upset about? What do you not like? What's not working out for you? And the big question that I ask people when they're doing step 1 is why? So somebody, let's say, we'll just talk body image, for example. And we know that New Year's resolutions, there's a lot of people that are either in them, have let them go, or feeling shame about what they did or didn't do right now as we record this in January. And just thinking about this notion of, okay, well, we know that there's sort of an ideal body type. We don't necessarily agree with it, but we know it exists. We know that quote unquote health has been sort of dictated to us in a specific way. So when somebody's like, okay, I want to lose 15 pounds this year, or I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to change the way I eat, I'm cutting out meat, or I'm doing X, Y, and Z, so they're starting to get to a goal. They're jumping ahead a little bit. First, walk back and say, what's the problem? What is the issue? And so the point there for us is to get clear on, is the issue an internal problem or an external problem? So someone might say, oh, I feel really fat. I don't feel good. I want to date again. And I'm feeling like I'm not able to be seen. That's external. My worth is dependent on being in a certain body. It could be, I'm just noticing that I feel sluggish. I don't enjoy my food anymore. I've stopped really giving my body the time and space to be nurtured, whether that's sleep, food, movement. It doesn't feel right. And I feel like my relationship with my body is suffering and I want to change that. Those are 2 very different problem and pain points, but the goal might look the same. So first is, what's the actual thing that's causing you problems and why is it a problem? So not, well, I'm fat. What does that mean to you? What is that? So we can start to then look at step 2. Step 2 is then, where did that come from? And I think for many of us, when we really think about our pain points, when we really think about, I feel like the thing that I'm working through now around my mom shame, and a little bit as a business owner, but I had to work through it as a partner, as a daughter-in-law, as a friend, a sister-in-law, all these different roles where I was constantly feeling resentful. I would feel this way even when I worked for other people, when I worked in kind of clinic settings or even other jobs prior to becoming a therapist. I was the kid in school that you'd get into the group and you just assume that they're going to do the whole project. That was who I was in relationships. Well, they'll do it all. They're the planner. They're the ones. I went to Hawaii with my husband and I and 4 of our friends, and I planned the whole trip for everybody. And so there's this degree of, I feel like I'm the one that everybody counts on to do everything.
and I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like anybody notices me. And I feel like if I don't do it, it won't get done. And that nobody cares enough to show up and do it anyways. That's the pain point. So let's say I get to that in part one. Point two is then, well, where does that come from? And also, really, why, where, what role am I playing in it? So then you think about, well, how did I get to a place? This isn't the first time I've done this. I felt this way in relationships, again, since I was the middle schooler assigned in the group assignment and I was the one doing it all. Well, I grew up in trauma. I grew up in chaos, and my way of managing it, I was parentified. I was very much the person that took care of my mom. When I lived with my grandma, I took care of my grandma. I had to be the one that had it together. I also learned how to not be an inconvenience. So taking care of everything, essentially being the project manager of every relationship, was how you got your worth. But then secondly, it keeps everybody at a distance. They don't know anything about me. I'm not vulnerable to them. I'm just the one that does it all and does it all well. And so then you kind of reflect on, well, what's both the impact of this? Well, I don't, I am in relationships where I feel like I don't want to be seen. I'm scared if they see me. I learned, that my shame is really rooted to X, Y, and Z. So it's, in the case, if we use the Hawaii trip planning example, it's, I feel like I love doing these things, but that doesn't even matter. It's, I feel like I have to do these things. I am responsible for everybody having a good time. And that's really what you get at. So the problem, right? I don't feel seen. I'm burnt out. Why is nobody else helping with this? Why is it an issue for me? Because I feel alone in this. I feel like I am worried about it. Well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the fact that I feel like I'm responsible for everyone's happiness. I have to be the one that does it all, and I can't ask for help. I have to handle it. So that's really kind of where we get at by part two. So I think about it almost like part one, you're saying, what's your problem statement? Part two is, what's the impact statement? How did we get here and what's the impact it has had?
Okay.
And then you go, okay, what do you want to do about that? Because addressing that is very different from addressing those surface pain points. Oh, I'm not making enough money in my business. Start a new program, do this thing. Have you tried funnels? Are you looking at your marketing? Well, that's very different than saying, I feel like I have to make more money or my business isn't worthy. I feel like I left the corporate world and I decided to start my own business. My worth in that, my approval, my validation is dependent on me, quote unquote, making it. Again, very different goal and response.
Yeah.
So then you start to write your goal around, what are your values? Who do you want to be and how do you want to show up in the world? And how do we tie whatever your next steps are to that? So when I think about, again, the example of planning the trip to Hawaii, I don't want to feel like it's automatically my responsibility to do everything for everyone. And I want to be okay when and if I do something and people are disappointed. On the flip side, I don't want to resent someone else if I don't do it, if they either don't do it or they don't do it my way. I want to allow for things to happen that aren't the way that I need them to be, because this sort of microcosm of controlling everything in this little spot isn't proving to get me what I'm looking for. So you get clear on that and you, all right, so this is what I want. And really specifically, again, tying it back to your values. And for me, it's, I value connection more than I value control. My shame loves control, but I know that the thing I've been seeking is connection where I don't have to be everything. Connection where I can learn that I can get sick and not be panicked that I don't work for a few days and my business is going to crumble. Or I can be honest about if I don't want to do something and my friendship isn't dependent on me doing everything that everybody else wants me to do and doing it well. Then you move into step 4, which is saying, okay, so now you've gotten a roadmap. A lot of what I do is I think about the integration of ourself. You mentioned self-forgiveness kind of being a key thing for us that we have to do. Well, one thing that often happens is when we jump to action or change too quickly in our life, when we try to bulldoze past shame and say, oh, it's not that, it's not this deep wound. It's just, I got to be better at time management. I got to be better at marketing. I got to be better at, setting a boundary, blah, blah, blah. Well, when we kind of blow past that and focus over here, we aren't really turning towards our past self and finding forgiveness and really integrating who we are and then thinking about who we want to be. We're just focused on what we call avoidant goals. So it's, I just want to get anywhere but here. I got to get somewhere that's not this. Instead, we say, this is who I am, what I've learned, how I've showed up in the world, how I'm making sense of my life to this point. And now because of that, I can get clear on where I want to go, given all of those things and who I am as a result of those pieces of myself. So then you really start to create this notion of, so how do I move from here to there? What's my roadmap? What's my plan? And how do I bring my full self into that? The me that was, if we use our examples, did go through trauma, did have addictions, did have abusive relationships, did have all this shame. How do I bring that person with me with love and grace? And to then factor that person into who I'm going to be as I grow forward. For you, when you're thinking about your daughter, it's thinking about, sure, maybe the goal is to get to a point where you feel fine, whoever she loves. Maybe the point is to say, I don't want to allow the stories I've been told about my merit and value being an indicator about the happiness that she gets to have. And I want to break that belief. I want to break that system. And now how do you do that? And that really oftentimes requires us to go back and say, what do we have to let go of that we couldn't control? What are the things that we have to radically accept about our lives? And so even thinking, if we go back to your faith, your religion, your culture, there are things that will be true no matter what you do with it. You could be completely fine with everything that has ever happened in your life, and she might still face that form of judgment, that form of difficulty that is out of your control. And so the other goal is to get to a point where you aren't trying to fix or get fixated on something that we can't do anything about. So that's really kind of step 4 is, okay, well, how do I get there? And how do I get really clear on what I can and can't control? What's mine and what's not? What do I have to learn to grieve and let go of? And then really the step number 5 is the one that everybody rushes to in the beginning, but then it's action. It's, okay, what do I need to do? And particularly I think about this as it breaks down to mindset, which is a big thing you talk about. How do we need to reframe our thoughts? What's the internal narrative? It's emotional intelligence. It's how do I reconnect to my emotional self and my physical self to really lean into my body. It's actions, thinking about our boundaries, the communication style. It's all these very tangible skills that, again, we want to learn how to do and implement. And it's making sure that we're learning how to implement them in ways that line up with where we're trying to go. And then the final step is our connections. It's thinking about what edits, additions, deletions do I have to make to my connections to support myself in being able to be this person, to embody this value, to live this life. And there might be, I'm just going to use your example as an example. There might be people in your family that it feels really painful about, but that you are not going to be able to have the same conversations with. You don't share the same things with them. You might not allow for people to know, if your daughter is dating somebody, what that looks like, what that means. You might not invite them into that conversation. That might feel sad for you because you want to celebrate her happiness as she does move out into the world and do those things. And a boundary you might have to set and a change you might have to do is say, gosh, I spent my life wanting to feel connected to my dad, my brother, people in my family, and I want them to see me and to see my daughter and to see the life that we have as worthy and to approve of that. I have to release that and recognize that there are some boundaries about what I can and can't give of myself and share of myself with them, because I'm not going to get that in the ways that I wanted. And I'm going to learn how to love me and to love them for what our relationship is, instead of being upset when I do those things and our relationship isn't what I wanted it to be. So it's a very, again, it's not like, get up, put the coffee on, do this, and then everything's fine. It's a very involved 5 steps, but it is this very, what I call an iterative process. I revisit it every day. When I get frustrated, building a marble run with my kid up in her room, and I want to break the toy in half because it's not stacking the way it's supposed to, using these 5 steps. What is the actual issue? Why am I feeling bad? What's the goal here when I'm playing with my kid? How do I focus on the goal and not get sideswept by shame? What do I need to do? And how do I set myself up to do that now and in the future? And then again, in the large scale things, doing some big thing with your business, buying a house, leaving a marriage, dating again, these bigger items too. It all comes back to this sort of 5-phase thinking process that really allows us to align with ourselves rather than get caught up in shame and external validation.
I think that's beautiful. I think I think it is. If every step leads to the next one. And I love the idea of understanding where you are, why you're feeling this way, and then recognizing what's within your control and what's what's beyond your control. I think this is key. And I was thinking about it. I mean, my daughter's only 15, so it's hopefully a long while until she does date. But the thing is, when she does eventually, it is beyond my control. I will not be able to dictate who she does and does not get involved with. And if they are from South Asian background, how they will react and what their mentality would be around divorce women or double divorce women. And God forbid, from a South Asian standard, if I was remarried, so if I'd married by then, I was married for the third time. Oh my God, that's really low character then. How dare I marry for the third time? What their idea of me would be, it's beyond my control. There's nothing I can do about it. And it's those moments that we have to really recognize. They are pivotal, because they can either diminish us and feel like we control nothing and we spiral downwards, or they empower us because we realize, you know what, that's beyond my control. But there is something that I can control, which is my reaction and, my daughter's reaction and the people around me. So I can educate her, make sure that she's, she interacts with open-minded, intelligent, educated people who will see beyond the social norms and who will see beyond this, this limited thinking, and would be able to recognize individual character rather than based on what the mother did or didn't do, but more based on what the individual is. So it's recognizing that, that what's in your control, what's beyond your control, I think is a key factor that leads you on to what actions you can and cannot take. And I think this is beautiful. And when we start implementing this strategy in a daily life on small things, like you said, doing with your daughter, then you're able to take those 5 steps and implement them on larger, more difficult situations, like your job, like your business, like your personal life, maybe your dating life, like your children, and so forth, because you've rehearsed it, you've learned how to manage emotions on a daily basis on a smaller scale. Then you're able to deal with the larger emotions on the life-changing aspects as well. I think it's beautiful. I think it's really beautiful done. So just very quick summary of these 5 steps again, please.
Yeah, so I really break them down into kind of 5 words because I love that. It's easy to recall. So I think about step 1 is identify your problem. Step 2, build your insight into where it came from, how it's impacted you. Step 3, define your goals and specifically who you want to be. Step 4, clarify. How are you going to get there? What are the things you need, the tools, the skills? And then step 5 is do. It's the action, the implementation step of everything that we've just defined in the process.
Wonderful. Now, on that note, we're going to wrap this up. It's phenomenal system, Kyira. I absolutely love it. And it's been a fascinating conversation. But Kyira, tell us, everybody, how can we connect with you? How can you find out how we can work with you if you want to work on this at a deeper level?
They can visit my website. As I mentioned, I just launched my new program in January 2023, and it is built on these 5 steps. It is this process entirely in depth, taking you through it to begin with. So we'll put a link down there if people are just curious about that. And then you can also check out tons of free resources and different skills and opportunities there to kind of get started in that process and maybe build some insight into if we might be a good fit to work together.
Wonderful. Now, if you're listening to us on the podcast, then all the links that Kyira mentioned or is referring to will be in the show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, then down below in the description section, once again, we will have the links for Kyira. Go check her out. As you've seen from the last 2 episodes, the conversations are very, very in-depth and we can carry on talking for a long time. But I think this topic is not discussed enough, especially not on entrepreneurial podcasts, because we're too busy focusing on strategy and what we need to do, and not enough as to why we feel we need to do it. And I think shame is such an important topic that you need to uncover, because I promise you, it will be playing in the background, influencing major life decisions in your throughout your life up until now. And a lot of the time, it's cloaked in all the obligations and duties and the right choices. And sometimes those choices were not right for you, but you were wearing the cloak of shame attached to, if you didn't follow those choices, where would you be? So it's been a fascinating conversation, Kyira. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
And thank you for listening to me and Kyira today on Money Talkies. I will be back on another Money Talkies segment with another amazing guest, finding out how you and I can build a better business. Until the next time we meet, this is Gullkhan signing off. Take care and bye for now.